thinks there's someone shooting in the building.
Gunfire in a Connecticut elementary school. Chaos in an Oregon mall. Horror in a Colorado theater. They're the images we'll never forget. Images of a daughter who could light up a room.
She is an incredible person, and I'm so blessed to be her dad.
And a teacher who protected her angels.
She was just the best.
The soft targets now gone. As America looks for answers, we're now faced with hard choices. Rights versus restrictions.
The Second Amendment allows us the right to keep and bear arms.
Securing public places.
Schools are reevaluating safety. They're looking at everything from where do kids go in a lockdown to how easy is it to get into this building.
Effectively treating the mentally ill.
Do you feel the system failed you?
Limiting violence in entertainment. And now, soft targets, hard choices.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm David Crabtree.
And I'm Deborah Morgan. Tonight we engage in a difficult conversation that impacts all of us. Over the next hour, we will tackle some tough issues related to gun violence in America and what can be done about it.
The soft targets are the innocent victims, those hurt or killed by someone determined to cause harm. To stop this, clearly we'll need to make some hard choices. We're going to focus on 4 key areas.
The first, access to guns. We go through the process of getting a gun permit in North Carolina, and we also see how easy it is to buy a gun without a background check. Then we explore gun control. We hear from those who are in favor of tighter restrictions and those who believe any restrictions would chip away at their constitutional rights to bear arms.
After the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut, many schools began to reevaluate their security plans and procedures. So we asked the question, are you willing to pay more in taxes for security in public places? The security concerns reach far beyond the classroom. What's the plans at hospitals and malls? Tonight, we'll show you how some places many of us visit are making sure safety is a priority.
Because of all the mass shootings, an issue getting much more attention now is mental illness. In many of the cases, the shooters struggled with mental health challenges. This topic is complicated and often impacts people early in life. So is the state of North Carolina doing enough to treat those with mental illness? Hear what mental health advocates believe is part of the solution and the role they say you can play in preventing a mass tragedy.
And finally, we're going to examine entertainment. Many video games and movies show aggressive behavior. Is there a connection between watching those and crime? We ask the question, does violence in movies and video games influence behavior? Also, is the level of violence in entertainment a cause of mass shootings? So, who may be responsible? Hollywood, video game makers, the media, parents.
President Obama has pushed the conversation forward on many of these issues. He's calling for new gun laws and signed 23 executive orders. One directs the Centers for Disease Control to study gun violence and the best ways to reduce it. Another makes sure every school has a comprehensive emergency management plan. Other orders make it easier to get mental health treatment, ensure that it's covered by health insurance plans, instruct the Consumer Product Safety Commission to test the effectiveness of gun locks and safes, and one launches a national awareness campaign about guns. The president told America we have to at least try to prevent another tragedy.
So I'm putting forward a specific set of proposals based on the work of Joe's task force. And in the days ahead, I intend to use whatever weight this office holds to make them a reality. Because while there is no law or set of laws that can prevent every senseless act of violence completely, no piece of legislation that will prevent every tragedy, every act of evil, if there's even one thing we can do to reduce this violence, if there's even one life that can be saved, then we've got an obligation to try.
President Obama signed the legislation with the vice president by his side. Some children were also there. They sent the president letters pleading for gun control.
We wanted to know how North Carolinians feel about many of the issues we're addressing tonight, so we surveyed 500 adults and an exclusive WRAL News poll. The issues range from violence and entertainment to gun control. One of the questions, what do you think is more important, to protect the right of Americans to own guns or to control gun ownership? The majority, 54% said right to own, 38% control ownership, 8 were not sure. Another question from the poll, what do you think is the best way to reduce gun violence? 63% said stricter enforcement of existing laws. 32% of North Carolinians said passing stricter laws is the best way to reduce gun violence. 5% were not sure.
But what is legal? And is it difficult to get a gun? Tonight, a look at what it takes to get handguns and assault-style rifles in North Carolina.
Want to buy an assault-style rifle in North Carolina without going through a criminal background check? It's easy. Just go to a website that sells firearms, find what you're looking for, and contact the seller.
Hi, I'm calling about the AK-47 you have listed on.
The seller of this AK-47 rifle wants $1,300 and is throwing in 7 magazines with 540 rounds of hollow point ammunition. No permit, no background check needed, and it's legal.
Just an ID, and then we just meet somewhere, and I give you the cash, you give me the gun?
There is no federal criminal background check required for a personal purchase of a long gun or a handgun.
And there are thousands of long guns or rifles and handguns being sold by individuals on websites like this one and other classified ads. This site is selling assault-style semi-automatic rifles like AR-15s with large capacity magazines and pistols like this 9mm semi-automatic that has a 30-round magazine. People selling handguns online are supposed to ask the buyer for a pistol purchase permit or a concealed handgun permit to show they have passed a background check. They're also supposed to go to a federally licensed firearms dealer to handle the transaction, but there's no way to make sure they do. Gun shows create another opportunity to buy guns without a background check.
That alone creates an underlying problem of people that are not lawfully, legally allowed to have a firearm, to include some violent criminals, a methodology in which to obtain a firearm.
This video shows an undercover investigation in 3 states conducted by the city of New York, where sellers were simply asking buyers for an ID and cash.
No background check?
Nothing. Just show me that you're from Ohio.
Okay. Well, that's good about the background check, because I probably couldn't pass one.
I don't care.
Huh?
All I got to do is demand you show me your license.
So you don't care about the background check,
nope.
Right?
Nope.
All right.
Because I wouldn't pass either, bud.
Is that right?
Oh, that's nice of you. The ATF says that so-called gun show loophole is a problem here in North Carolina, too. And the results of our WRAL News poll show that 56% of those surveyed think laws on buying guns at gun shows are not strict enough. There are laws in our state designed to keep guns out of the wrong hands. To buy a handgun here, you have to get a pistol purchase permit at your local sheriff's office. You fill out a simple 1-page form and get in line.
Hi. Yes, I'd like to apply for a pistol permit.
Then present the form with a driver's license or another official photo ID to prove you are at least 21 and you are a resident of both North Carolina and the county where you're applying for the permit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
If you are qualified, then we'll get you a pistol permit.
Qualifying means passing a background check, which is a check of court, DMV, and other records.
Anything that we can to see what this person has had on his or her record.
You will be denied a permit if you are a felon, a fugitive, have criminal charges pending or a substantial criminal record, have a history of drug addiction, have been declared mentally incompetent, or have been committed to a mental institution, have been convicted of domestic violence or are under a domestic violence protective order, have a suspended driver's license, have been dishonorably discharged from the military, are an illegal alien, or have renounced your citizenship. To get a permit to carry a concealed handgun, the process is similar, only you have to pass a training course, be fingerprinted, and sign a waiver that allows the release of any mental health records, something not required with an ordinary pistol purchase permit.
Personal offenses, Chris, I'm help you.
No permit is required to buy a rifle, but if you buy a rifle from a federally licensed firearms dealer, You will need to pass a background check or present a pistol permit to show that you have. That does not include a mental health history. The ATF says so-called straw sales of guns are another detour around background checks.
Where people go into a gun dealer, they buy guns on its face are lawful, and then they turn around and either sell them on the street immediately to the people that cannot own them, or they were paid to go in there and do that process to begin with.
Then, of course, there are guns stolen in break-ins of homes, cars, and gun stores. The ATF says North Carolina is the #1 state for gun store break-ins. Many of those guns end up out of state, while guns stolen in home and car burglaries tend to stay in the state. Most of the stolen guns end up being sold person to person in an unregulated black market.
Knowingly possessing a stolen firearm in this country is a federal felony.
More than 1,600 people were charged with possession of a stolen firearm in our state in 2011. In a WRAL documentary in June 2011, David asked a young gang member about the availability of such guns.
Somebody came to you and wanted a gun. How long would it take you to get them a gun?
I mean, guns are everywhere.
A day?
Probably even less than about 30 minutes.
No law will prevent every illegal gun sale, whether it's between people on the street, on the internet, or at gun shows. The president is calling for universal background checks in his executive order. In our WRAL News poll, we asked, should criminal background checks be required for every person who wants to purchase a firearm? An overwhelming 93% said that checks should be required. 5% said they should not be required, and 2% were not sure.
Some say common sense laws can prevent many illegal gun sales and help keep at least some guns out of the wrong hands. Not everyone sees more laws as the answer.
I'll shoulder the firearm, I'll bring it up.
Mike Tilley is the owner of Personal Defense and Handgun Safety Center in Raleigh, a firearm shop, range, and school. How did you get interested in firearms?
That's a good question. I grew up with firearms as a young boy, hunting in the woods for squirrels and target shooting.
Tilley later started shooting competitively. His son Chris took after him. This is Chris in a target shooting competition in Montana. He's a two-time gold medalist representing the U.S. in international target shooting competitions. Tilley says many people get a rush from firing a gun. Is that something that you have felt when you fire these firearms?
I think there's a rush, and I think most everybody that shoots one gets a little bit of rush from it. And it's the ultimate remote control device. You're setting off an explosion and precisely controlling, a projectile to go to a target. And I think there's a little bit of power that comes along with that. It's loaded. Pick it up, take it off safe, finger off the trigger until you're ready to pull the trigger.
Tilley let me feel a little of that rush of power by letting me fire a military-style rifle with a 25-round magazine.
Good shot.
I hit my target with every shot on my first try and was amazed at how easily the gun fired.
It's kind of a rush, though, wasn't it?
I admit that it was. I can see why people enjoy target practice. Yeah. Tilley sells semi-automatic rifles with large capacity magazines. In fact, he is sold out of the AR-15, one of the most popular assault-style rifles. People have been buying them up for fear they will be banned.
And they're useful for hunting, they're useful for competition, they're useful for home defense.
The handguns he sells are also popular for home defense.
The Second Amendment allows us the right to keep and bear arms for personal protection and even protection against tyranny of government. That's really what the Second Amendment falls back to, our individual right to protect ourselves.
Do you sleep better at night?
Knowing that I have a firearm? Yes, I certainly do. There's evil in this world, and this gives us one more option to deal with it.
We saw that kind of evil in Newtown and too many other places before. It has prompted a volley of legislative proposals to place more restrictions on firearms. They include reinstatement of a 1994 ban on assault-style rifles and high-capacity magazines, requiring background checks for private sales, including sales at gun shows, and a national database that tracks gun ownership. The proposals have sparked passionate protests from gun rights activists.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
A gun rights group called Grassroots North Carolina has threatened to punish members of Congress who support more gun control. As an alternative to more restrictions, the NRA is proposing armed security in our schools.
Can't we afford to put a police officer in every single school?
Is that a good learning environment for our children? Do we want them to have to walk past somebody with an M16 when they go into school to learn?
North Carolinians Against Gun Violence supports current proposals to place more restrictions on assault-style rifles and on gun sales.
I don't think that's an infringement on anybody's Second Amendment rights. They can still have a gun in their home to protect themselves if they need it. They can still do the target practicing. They can still hunt.
Neely says there's no need for anyone to be able to buy an assault-style rifle with high-capacity magazines capable of killing dozens of people very quickly.
They're on our streets now. They're killing our babies, and that's not acceptable.
This is similar to what a lot of people are calling assault rifles.
Mike says he and other responsible gun owners are upset about the Newtown tragedy and other deadly shootings too. But he says more restrictions on firearms aren't the answer.
The gun is the quick, easy target. These are all tragedies, and we all look for reasons to fix it, and we're a fix-it society. We want to find something that we can put our finger on and say, this is the problem, let's fix it. And unfortunately, many laws were already broken in all of these situations, and more laws would have only made law-abiding citizens have to jump through more hoops, and it really doesn't change anything.
The NRA has been under close scrutiny following the shootings in Newtown. The organization's president, David Keene, said the focus should not be on guns. He believes it should be on making schools safer.
Much of the debate over gun control has been about semi-automatic weapons. In our poll, we asked the question, would you support or oppose a law requiring a nationwide ban on semi-automatic weapons? 45% said they would oppose a ban. 42% said they would support it. 13% were not sure.
To get more perspective on what President Obama is proposing, I spoke with Duke University professor Philip Cook. He's written for the New York Times, Chronicle of Higher Education, and authored the book, Gun Violence, The Real Cost. Dr. Cook focuses extensively on the U.S. trying to come to grips with gun control issues. As you look at what President Obama announced in his latest set of proposals, is there anything that strikes you that he can accomplish as far as something that needs congressional approval?
I think that one bold proposal that has some chance is the universal background check, simply because that has very strong popular support right now, that the public sees the good sense of doing that. And that it is just remotely possible that Congress will come in line and support that idea.
You've written extensively about the opportunity the Congress had in the past and possibly have now to go along with what the president wants. And it's something that you've written that you think could make a difference.
I think it could make a difference with respect to the rampage shootings, very often, including in the Connecticut case, the Newtown massacre. The situation was, of course, that the shooter did have a large capacity magazine and was able to fire a great many times and kill a great many people quickly as a result without reloading. And so a measure that limits the distribution of large capacity magazines is very much targeted on just the problem that brought us here, which is the terribly tragic rampage shootings. The question is how to design a regulation that would be effective. And our old assault weapons ban in 1994 probably was not particularly effective.
If Congress were to pass a limit on magazines for assault-style rifles, Cook believes the government should offer a buyback to remove existing magazines from the market. And he was clear. The idea is, as his words, in no way to take away or buy back anyone's firearms, only to buy from owners those large magazines.
A lot of the debate on gun control centers around the specifics about guns, magazines, and ammunition. We asked the question, would you support or oppose a law that limits how much ammunition a gun can hold? Here are the results. 55% said they would support that, 34% oppose it, and 10% say they are not sure. Getting more specific now about ammunition, 54% of the people said they would support a law that does go ahead and limit how much ammunition can be purchased at one time. 37% said they oppose that, 9% were not sure.
We have all seen the horror, fear, and chaos after someone goes on a shooting rampages in places where lots of people are gathered. Just last month, a man started shooting inside an Oregon mall. It was just a few weeks before Christmas. 2 people were killed, 1 other was wounded. Investigators say the shooter, 22-year-old Jacob Roberts, then killed himself. Police say he stole the rifle he used in that attack. And 13 years ago, we all watched as these students were evacuated from Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado. In April 1999, 2 students, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, went on a shooting rampage, killing a dozen schoolmates and a teacher in the school's library. It sparked a debate about a number of issues, including bullying, mental health, and school security. And that brings us to this question from our poll. Which one thing would be most effective in reducing school shootings? 41% of those we asked said better security. 18% said making access to guns more difficult. 16% better mental health care. 10% reducing bullying. 5% restricting violence in entertainment.
The recent violence in public places across the nation has caused everyone to reevaluate safety. How safe are our schools, our malls, our hospitals? Can we make them even safer? Amanda Lamb spent time at 3 places we all go to reveal more about just how safe we really are.
The Lee County school system has just under 10,000 students. But now they have something even the biggest school districts with more resources don't have.
The modulars back here.
Armed officers patrolling their elementary schools.
This is one of the other features we discussed after the fatal shootings in Connecticut.
Since the shooting occurred, I do get kind of nervous.
It's a proposal that Assistant Wake County Elementary School teacher Tony Mosley, who's also the grandmother of 2 kindergarten students, wishes was on the table at her school.
I would like to see more security. I feel that we should have like a police right there on site. Should be at every school.
Since the Connecticut shooting, Lee County School Superintendent Jeff Moss is fast-tracking a proposal to better secure the 16 schools in his district.
As you notice, there is no security. The doors are open the entire time the schools are in session.
Moss's plan involves everything from permanently stationing armed officers at all elementary schools to high-tech security measures.
So what we're looking at doing is installing an audio-visual system with a buzzer entrance.
Included in this plan, the receptionist would have a list of people not permitted on school grounds.
Glass is a big feature in most schools, but it's not necessarily the safest feature.
It's not.
Moss is also looking at replacing exterior glass with either tinted glass or a security glass that can be found in other parts of the school.
One of the safety features they have in classrooms here in Lee County, they have wires in the windows of the classroom doors. This means even if you break this glass, it's really hard to reach in and unlock the door. Another simple feature, a piece of plastic that covers the window in the event of a lockdown.
The system we're going to put in as well will have an immediate lockdown feature so that the principal can lock all exterior doors with the touch of a button.
Where would you put children?
We try to move them away from doors and any of the windows, so behind the bookshelf and near the cupboards there.
Teachers like Kristen Young know exactly what to do in a lockdown because they train for it.
After the incident in Connecticut, does that make teachers more on guard, more aware?
It certainly makes us more aware. We want to do the best to keep everyone safe. Does it change the way we've done our procedures? We've been doing it all along.
Not until Connecticut did I really worry about it here.
Terry Anderson is the parent of 3 school-aged children. She also works as a tutor in a Lee County elementary school.
And then I started thinking about when I send my children to school, how hard or how easy would it be for someone to get into their building.
But Anderson says seeing the armed police officer on campus, as well as hearing about the superintendent's proposal, has put her mind at ease.
Makes me feel very comfortable. It makes me happy to know that somebody's watching out for my children besides myself.
Schools aren't the only facilities evaluating security measures. Every organization that is open to the public is learning lessons from the recent mass shootings, including hospitals.
We're an organization that was light years ahead of many others in the country in the area of public safety.
Dr. Bill Atkinson is the CEO and president of Wake Med.
You occasionally can have issues, and our intent is always in a place that has a lot of people passing through to make sure it stays a safe place, and I think we've done a great job with that over many, many years.
A big part of Wake Med's security strategy involves having their own armed police force that includes 50 sworn officers. When you look at the Wake Med campus from the helipad, you realize the enormity of this property. It's like a small city. Between patients, visitors, staff, doctors, more than 20,000 people a day come through these doors. Doors that are open 24/7. Some doors are locked to areas that require higher security.
There are a lot of parts of the hospital where you have closed doors you have to be buzzed in.
Yes, there are access controlled areas, and again, that's unit to unit.
A lot of the security here we don't see, the public doesn't see.
And you wouldn't.
But chances are, no matter where you are in the public spaces at Wake Med, you're on camera.
Many hundreds and hundreds of cameras.
That right there, that little ball
That
on
little
the
ball
ceiling.
is an example. It's one of our newer cameras.
Wake Med's state-of-the-art operations center allows them to monitor every camera.
So very subtle.
Very, very subtle. We try to, that's the biggest thing. We try to make sure, they're not so obtrusive, but they're in areas that are very important to cover, entrances, exits.
Entrances include not just entrances to the buildings, but entrances to separate units within those buildings.
So elevators, that's another point of access for people. Do you have the ability to lock these down if you need to?
Yes, we do. We can either do it manually, or a lot of our elevators do have access control, for certain floors that that are restricted.
And if anyone does spot a security concern, there are call boxes located throughout the campus.
How does this work?
So you'll push the button for help.
Okay.
And once you push that button, the blue light will flash, and it'll ring an alarm to our dispatch center.
But what about those places we go all the time and don't usually think about safety?
We believe at this point that there was one and only one shooter involved.
A shooting in December at a mall near Portland, Oregon, left 3 people dead, including the shooter.
What do you think about the mall, for example?
Yeah, I think it's always scary, and it's always in the back of our minds that anything can happen anywhere, especially nowadays. But I think overall I feel pretty safe there.
Now it's time to start thinking about where to park, who to be with, and never go alone if you can avoid it.
Crabtree Valley Mall in Raleigh is one of the busiest malls in the state. It attracts 14 million visitors a year, and that number is constantly going up. And with more than 3,000 employees here, that's a lot of people to protect.
Crabtree has its own armed police force that includes 26 sworn officers.
Do you think that makes people feel safer? I mean, to see somebody in a uniform like that, it's not a security guard, you're a police officer.
Absolutely.
The high visibility of his officers is something Crabtree Police Chief Devlin Bullock believes is a big deterrent to violence.
When you're looking around, tell me some of the things that you, as the chief here, what are you looking for?
Safety.
What are you paying attention to?
Safety, our customers, making sure the mall is a safe environment for everyone.
So it's just something kind of, you don't dwell on it, but you keep it in the back of your mind.
Right. Yeah. Try not to hover because you don't want them to be scared everywhere they are. But it's definitely in our minds all the time.
And on the minds of people in charge of security, the expensive price tag. Moss says he's fortunate that Lee County commissioners are behind his proposal to better protect their schools.
It's not something you can do on the cheap. You either do it the right way first time out, or you really should not tackle it.
But parents say there is one thing money can't buy when it comes to our children, and it's up to us to give it to them.
Definitely a little extra hug and a little bit of an extra reminder how much I love them when they leave.
Amanda Lamb, WRAL News.
So far, Lee County has only priced the cost of the door security system for each school, which adds up to $212,000. This is just a fraction of their $86 million total budget, less than 1%. But many other security measures are in the plan that cost money as well. They expect to have the cost for those added up next month.
The NRA suggested having armed guards at every school. But who would pay for this? We asked 500 people, are you willing to pay more in taxes to have armed guards at schools? 50% said yes, 35% said no, 14% were not sure.
You may be thinking mass shootings and attacks only happen somewhere else. Well, several have taken place here in North Carolina. And Gerald Owens explains many of them had deadly outcomes.
July 17, 1988. In one of the worst mass shootings ever in North Carolina, Michael Hayes walked out of his failing moped business in Forsyth County and began firing at cars with a .22 caliber rifle. 4 people were killed, 5 others injured. Hayes said he thought they were demons and he was doing the work of the Lord.
Real red, sunken eyes and a sulfuric stench, coming up from like the pits of hell, I thought, since they're demons.
Hayes was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent 2 decades in Dorothea Dix Hospital. He was released in 2010, said to be cured of his own inner demons.
He is completely cured. He is a much wiser, more mature, more stable person now than he was even 5 or 10 years ago.
Attorney Carl Knutson recently told WRAL Hayes has not been on psychiatric medicine for 20 years. He was unconditionally discharged and now lives in Wake County. January 26, 1995. Dressed in camouflage and armed with an M1 rifle and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, UNC law student Wendell Williamson walked down Henderson Street in Chapel Hill firing randomly. 2 people were killed. A police officer was seriously hurt. Again, the shooter was found not guilty by reason of insanity, much to the dismay of the victims' families.
There's an issue of victims. Our son was a victim, we're victims.
Williamson is being treated for paranoid schizophrenia at Central Regional Hospital in Buckner, and he's been granted limited off-campus privileges. 9 months later, gunfire scattered soldiers during an exercise at Fort Bragg. In the confusion, Sergeant William Kreutzer Jr. injured 18 soldiers and killed Major Stephen Badger. Kreutzer pleaded guilty and is serving life in prison. He has since appealed his sentence. March 3, 2006. This time the weapon was an automobile. 9 people were hurt when 23-year-old Mohammed Taheri drove a rented Jeep into a crowd on UNC's campus.
All of a sudden, he just gunned it, and I heard the tires squealing, and people started screaming.
The UNC graduate called it revenge for the deaths of Muslims around the world. His defense team initially offered an insanity defense. Taheri later pleaded guilty to 9 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to up to 33 years in prison.
It's all sacrifice.
What are you talking about?
We all have to die.
These are the rantings of 19-year-old Alvaro Castillo after his arrest for a shooting rampage on August 30, 2006. Castillo was convicted of killing his father, then driving to Orange High School and firing at students. 2 students were hurt. His lawyer said Castillo believed he was told by God to sacrifice his father and the students. They unsuccessfully pursued an insanity defense. Castillo is serving life in prison.
I hope he rots in hell.
Wanda Neal had few words as she left the courthouse after the sentencing of her estranged husband, Robert Stewart. Prosecutors say Neal was the target on March 29, 2009, when Stewart walked into the Pine Lake Health and Rehab Center in Carthage with an arsenal of weapons. Stewart killed 7 residents and 1 nurse while injuring 3 others. He was convicted of 8 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to at least 141 years in prison. Gerald Owens, WRAL News.
And we have archived our coverage of these attacks in a special section on WRAL.com. Gun control and security measures often get much of the attention following a mass shooting. Another part of the equation is mental health, a challenge many of the shooters dealt with.
Bruce Mildworth takes a look at whether people with severe mental health issues in North Carolina are getting the care they need when they need it. He also examines whether the state is doing enough to prevent the next mass shooting from happening here.
It was very difficult.
Looking at old pictures,
And there's another one of him and his sister.
brings back good memories for Kathy Zeke.
And this was his preschool graduation.
Her son Tony Zeke is now 33. Unfortunately, they don't get to see each other as much as she'd like.
We see him about every 3 weeks.
They drive from their home near High Point to a state psychiatric hospital in Butner.
What is his diagnosis now?
Paranoid schizophrenia.
As a kid, Tony Zicke was smart and athletic. He earned a scholarship to an elite private high school.
It was based on teacher referrals, test scores, IQ. This picture shows the transition. Everything about him is different, his whole demeanor, just the look on his face.
Tony was diagnosed at the age of 20 with a severe case of schizophrenia. That year, his mother, Kathy, told mental health officials he was dangerous, that he'd hurt someone. No one listened.
It was very difficult for his grandparents.
From 2000 to 2005, Tony was placed in about a dozen group homes in 3 different counties.
He had hit people in the face in more than one group home.
He fired a gun several times in a group home.
That's correct.
He stabbed someone in the neck.
That's correct, with a pencil.
Jail cells and hospital rooms became her son's temporary home away from home.
And they would basically just put him in confinement because the jail wasn't set up to know what to do with him. So that was just a short-term thing until they let him back out.
Kathy Zicke pleaded for long-term hospitalization to get her son the care he needed, as well as to protect the people around him. She says he did not qualify.
At this point, are you thinking the system's just broken?
Of course I am. He was going to be released to the streets with no medicine, no place to live, unless I stepped in.
In 2005, Zicke was charged with first-degree murder. One night, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen because he thought he saw his 85-year-old roommate, Ruth Terrell, covered in rats.
And he jumped on top of her. And from what he says, he was trying to kill the rats because he knew they were hurting her.
Multiple surface cuts covered the elderly woman's upper body.
She had to be hospitalized and she died later from other complications. That shouldn't have happened. The mental health center should have stepped in when they got the call the day before that he was having visual hallucinations.
Do you feel the system failed you?
I do. I feel that the system failed him.
In addition to failing her son, Kathy believes the system failed Ruth Terrell and her family as well.
That has just always been so devastating to me.
The right services should have been there for him.
Debbie Dehoff is the executive director of NAMI North Carolina, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. With what happened to Tony in 2005, could this happen again in 2013?
Yeah, I think it could happen because we're just not where we need to be right now. Sadly, I think that people still do have to almost commit a crime to get the services that they need, which is usually a hospital bed. The system needs much more money. Mental health generally is far underfunded. But the other thing we need to do better is to do better with the money that we do have, by better coordinating it, making it easier for somebody like Tony Zicke to get his needs met.
What does that say about the system as far as being reactive versus proactive?
Well, it says everything, that we're stuck in a reactive mode, basically.
The gaps that we've seen in the mental health system in the past have been very significant and have had significant impacts.
State Representative Nelson Dollar acknowledges that managing North Carolina's mental health arena is a major challenge. For more than a decade, the state's mental health system has undergone various reforms. The latest ongoing effort is 2 years in the making.
You've seen a conversion to a system that we believe will far better manage the mental health dollars that we have in this state, and more importantly, better manage the care of individuals who suffer from mental illness.
I'm ever hopeful that the change in all of this will help move us to a proactive system where we keep people well.
Republican leaders in the General Assembly have indicated the solution is controlling costs, not more money.
The resources are going to be relatively flat for the foreseeable future. We know that.
Yeah. That's a problem. That's a big problem. We need more accessibility.
This woman, who we'll call Ellen, wants to keep her identity hidden because of the stigma associated with mental illness.
It is sad and frustrating.
She's protecting her 7-year-old daughter, who we'll call Emily.
I don't want her to be teased for something that's not her fault.
Emily's current diagnosis is a mood disorder, anxiety, and ADHD.
She's explosive and aggressive, so any tiny little thing can set her off and you can't control it.
She says the rage usually shows itself at home and with family, often with her younger brother.
Did she ever try to hurt him?
She's been hurting him since he was born. Just even when he was a tiny baby, she would just stop and take off her shoes and hit him in the face. And so we locked his door from the very beginning at night.
For Ellen and her husband, it took them years to even begin to understand how to navigate through the system.
It is frustrating. It's a very individual process. We have paid tens of thousands of dollars out of pocket. In 1 year, we paid $15,000 out of pocket for services that we thought we needed.
That's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. And just going from place to place. It's very hard.
On many occasions, she said the insurance company just made the process that much harder.
It has been very difficult, and it does feel a lot of the time like they're trying not to pay for things. And it makes me angry for someone else to tell me that my child doesn't need what I know my child needs.
What has to change for you to be more comfortable to share the experience publicly?
I think if mental illness is presented as something that can be managed, and something that is not anyone's fault. Just a brain disorder, a problem in the brain, like a problem with the liver or any other organ.
There's not quite the parity between mental health and physical or medical health.
Dr. April Harris-Britt is a psychologist in Durham. Dr. Amy Fairchild is a psychiatrist with a private practice in Cary. Both take issue with the higher deductibles, higher copays, and lack of access for mental health care.
It can pretty much, just eliminate the possibility of getting any types of services.
It's about having an equal playing field with mental health and medical health, and it's about breaking down the barriers to stigma. We are seeing sicker and sicker children and families in more crisis because they are waiting.
And we have fewer resources to support them.
One of the stigmas here is people with mental illness are violent and they'll either hurt themselves or someone else. Experts say it's just not true, that a majority of people with mental health issues are actually not violent or aggressive.
When it goes to untreated mental illness, then that's when we need to start being concerned.
With the recent string of mass shootings, the public believes it's not a matter of if another one will happen, but when and where.
Is there anything that says can't happen here?
Unfortunately, there isn't. The best prevention, I think, the best intervention is to try and make sure that preventative services are there.
Are they?
There are some limits on preventative services. You don't go in saying, I want to make sure it doesn't get that bad. It's usually in the point of crisis where people are getting services.
Pat McCrory,
I do.
North Carolina's new governor,
We've got a lot of laws on the books.
believes the state's focus should not be on changing gun laws, but rather focusing on the mental health system, a system which he says is broken.
If you look at all of these incidents throughout the nation, it's been these loners that have some serious issues.
Doctors Harris-Britt and Fairchild say everyone can play a role in trying to prevent a tragedy like this. They suggest paying attention to the warning signs and risk factors, such as someone feeling marginalized and not accepted.
It is perplexing when you have young adults and teenagers that can plan and plot, and how do people not know? And it's really about connecting with your loved one about how they're doing.
You look for isolation, you look for disengagement, whether it's with the school or with work or just other people or family.
They've a lot of times been the victims of bullying or the victims of abuse themselves.
I think early intervention and prevention are so important.
As of the most recent report in 2011, North Carolina's public schools, K through 12, were aware of more than 75,000 students with a mental illness. Experts say there are likely thousands more school systems are not aware of.
It's incumbent upon advocates to say we need more money to create the system that we need so we don't have things like Sandy Hook.
As your son went so long without the treatment he really needed, do you feel that he could have been the face of a Newtown, Connecticut type crime here in North Carolina?
Unfortunately, I do feel like he could have been. It was just always my fear.
Tony Zeke has spent the past 7 years in a North Carolina psychiatric hospital, the very place his mother long begged for him to be. But it took someone's death for him to stay long term.
And he is no longer violent or assaultive. It's what he needed years before. And, I often wonder if that had happened sooner, what his life could have been.
That was Bruce Mildorf reporting. The state psychiatric hospitals are currently bursting at the seams. During the last fiscal year, patients in crisis had to wait on average more than 3 days for a spot to open up at the state's newest facility in Butner. Over the past 6 months, patients trying to get in are having to wait even longer than they did last year, about 3.5 days.
So we asked several questions about issues surrounding mental health in North Carolina. In our news poll, we asked, do you think enough services are being offered to those with mental health problems in North Carolina, or could the state be doing more? Take a look at these numbers. 81% said the state could do more. Only 7% said the state is doing enough. 12% weren't sure. And if the state is to do more, there are questions about funding and where money and resources to treat the mentally ill will come from. 44% of the people we polled said yes, they're willing to pay more in taxes for the government to spend more on mental health issues. 40% said no, they're not wanting to pay more. 16% were not sure. Another question on mental illness in this poll. Are people who cause mass shootings so mentally ill they would do something similar no matter what, or does violence in society play a part? The numbers were very close here. 48% said society plays a part. 46% said they would do something similar. 6% were not sure.
Another piece that has entered the conversation to prevent mass shootings, violence in entertainment. Shortly after the shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary, NRA leaders blamed Hollywood, video games, and music for creating a culture of violence in our country. The prevalence of violence in media is tough to argue. According to the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, television programs display 812 violent acts per hour. The typical American child will view more than 200,000 acts of violence, including 16,000 murders before the age of 18. That's just on TV. The most popular movies and video games tend to be violent, gory, and graphic. Does that play a role in making a more violent society? WRAL's Renee Chu spoke with experts, parents, and teenagers to explore that question.
We all know sex sells. But the biggest seller in mass media?
What are you prepared to do?
Violence. The top earner at the box office for 2012? The Avengers, showing the destruction of New York City. Second was The Dark Knight Rises, filled with explosions and gun violence. The best-selling video game in the U.S. last year. The first-person shooter game, Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And the body count doesn't stop there. Showtime's Homeland won the Primetime Emmy of 2012. AMC's The Walking Dead is this season's highest-rated entertainment TV program with adults 18 to 49. Not to mention 7 of the 10 most popular primetime series are about solving violent crimes like NCIS and Criminal Minds. What holds 29-year-old Danny Shattuck's interest? Call of Duty Black Ops 2. Once a week, you'll find him at the Strafe Gaming Lounge in Fuquay Arena. His remote control, a simulated assault rifle.
You're pretty much trying to stop terrorists from destroying the world.
From the first-person shooter perspective, it's very intense, very graphic.
Yeah, absolutely it is, and that's why it's rated M for mature. I get a rush from trying to win. I mean, it's a game at the end.
Shattuck says it's pure entertainment and in no way translates into real life. But UNC Professor Emeritus Dr. Jane Brown says there is a link between violence kids and teens see on screen and their behavior.
The more violence they see in the media or the more violent video games they play, the more likely they are to be aggressive in their own lives.
Dr. Brown has studied the effects of media for 30 years. She's not saying people who watch Kill Bill will want to go and kill someone in real life. She does say young people who are naturally aggressive see violence in the media and think it's an appropriate way to solve conflict.
And then we think the media probably reinforces those tendencies. So those people would be more likely then to be behaving aggressively after seeing a violent movie or after playing violent video games.
It's a connection Lisa McGoldrick wants to avoid, which is why her sons, 10-year-old Michael and 12-year-old Billy, stick to video games like Guitar Hero. Definitely no Call of Duty or Halo.
They can get a child to think that, wow, this is really cool, this is great. Look, I can shoot 100 people and I'm not getting killed. And I think that I think playing violence and watching violence sometimes does promote it, and I'm not one to promote violence.
In an exclusive WRAL poll, we asked 500 adults, is the level of violence in entertainment, including video games, a cause of mass shootings? The majority said violence in entertainment is either a minor cause or not a cause at all, but 31% said it is a major cause. Wakefield High School senior Patrick Hines says the blame on video games for causing violence is misplaced. If anything, he says the news media plays a role.
The shooter and the victim were taken to St. Louis Hospital.
I do believe that, when people report on, violence, wars going on in foreign countries, people getting shot and killed in their own neighborhoods, that kind of stuff I believe has more impact than any kind of video game.
Why is that?
Well, because it hits closer to home.
The realism of video games, it's just fantasy to die-hard gamers. 16-year-old Nina Saponara is president of the video game club at Wakefield High. At school, they stick to tamer games, but occasionally she'll play first-person shooter games at home.
I just feel like that it's a video game. I know that it's a fake person. If I'm playing a war game that I'm shooting at, I know it's a fake person or something. So it doesn't really faze me in that sort of stuff.
What? That was ugly.
20-year-old Lenny Hume prefers fighting games over shooter games.
What?
Bashing and killing your opponents, it's all part of the challenge.
Do you see it as violent?
Not really. I mean, when, like in a game, if to win, you need to beat up another player. I just see it as like an objective. Like I can play war games, but I don't have a desire to go shoot anyone in real life, but it's fun to do in a video game.
Experts say not all violence in entertainment has a harmful impact. Take, for instance, Schindler's List. The movie portrays the pain, power, and suffering from Nazi aggression and the Holocaust. It's violence with real consequences. The problem, experts say, is the gratuitous violence that we see in action films like 300. It glamorizes the brutality of war. It's all about how many people can we kill, how much blood spatter can we show.
We want to be emotionally stimulated. We like that in our entertainment media, and so violence is a cheap way to do it. It's cheaper than having really great dialogue and really great acting, and other kinds of emotions portrayed. That's harder. Violence is easy.
The chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America says the movie and television industry stand ready to be part of the national conversation.
By thanking you all for being here.
The Entertainment Software Association recently met with Vice President Joe Biden and his Gun Violence Commission and says it looks forward to continuing the discussion. The group released this statement saying, in part, "We expressed in the meeting that the United States Supreme Court recently affirmed that the independent scientific research conducted to date has found no causal connection between video games and real-life violence. We did contact video game companies in North Carolina for their take. They declined to comment or did not respond.
It's loading up, sorry.
We did find Ryan Snell, who started his own video game design company in Cary this past year.
And then you actually slice them.
He's produced 14 video games. Most of them he describes as tame and casual. Snell says the violence you see in many video games these days is not gratuitous. It serves a purpose.
The realer it is, the more gritty it is, the more people will feel immersed.
He says video game companies are marketing an experience. not murder.
It's just like playing a race car game and you run into a wall and your car doesn't get damaged. You feel like something's been taken away. You're just like, well, that's not how it works.
Don't move! No doubt, violence works to thrill audiences. As much as violence appears on TV, Washington has no rules to regulate it. The FCC does regulate sex, nudity, and foul language, but nothing about blood and gore.
It's not only the parents who have to pay attention to this. The media must take some responsibility for this. It is egregious at this point. It is way out of line.
In our poll, we also asked if the government were able to require a reduced amount of violence in entertainment, would it reduce the incidence of mass shootings? 39% said a little. 36% said not at all. 20% felt government regulations would reduce mass shootings by a lot. Major medical and public health organizations have in the past called on Congress to step up based on years of their research.
We know from more than 50 years of really good studies that the media have an effect on adolescents' aggressive behavior.
Even more than that, Dr. Brown says violence in media can desensitize us all. Where violence portrayed goes unpunished or rewarded, only makes it seem more acceptable.
But you don't see this as contributing to a culture of violence in our society?
We've always been a culture of violence in America. I mean, look at all the old books about the Old West, the old John Wayne movies. To be honest with you, Dante's Inferno is way more graphic than Call of Duty.
You got a drone turning in on your convoy. Video games have ratings, and retailers say that does help keep mature-themed video games out of the wrong hands. But there's no substitute for parenting. Nina Saponera's mom is okay with the shooter games now, but not before.
When her and her brother were younger, I definitely was, and they weren't playing it when they were young, but now they're 19 and 17. I really don't, because I know how my children are, and they're not violent at all.
Everybody wants to find something to blame, but they don't understand. The problem is, we're a country of absentee parents.
And a country that loves its entertainment. No matter how violent.
Wow.
Renee Chu, WRAL News.
Unlike in the U.S., many countries have regulations restricting TV programs with excessive violence to certain time periods when it's more suitable for adults. Brazil, Canada, the U.K., France, Germany, and Spain are just some of the countries that regulate violence on TV.
We have covered a lot of information in the past hour, and we have a wealth of resources on WRAL.com. There you can see all the poll results, get answers to common questions about gun rights and laws.
You can also find a list of resources for families dealing with mental illness. Thank you for joining us.